The high-stakes atmosphere within the Senate Judiciary Committee chambers recently reached a fever pitch as a confrontation of historic proportions unfolded between Senator Elizabeth Warren and Attorney General Pam Bondi. This exchange did not merely represent a routine legislative oversight function, but rather signaled a profound intersection of national security concerns and ethical accountability. The crux of the inquiry centered on a meticulously documented series of financial maneuvers involving approximately $847,000 that investigators suggest originated from Russian interests. These funds reportedly traversed a labyrinthine network of offshore shell corporations and Baltic financial institutions designed to obscure the ultimate beneficiary of the capital. The strategic movement of such substantial wealth raises significant alarms regarding the integrity of the American sanctions regime and the potential for illicit foreign influence at the highest levels of government. Senator Warren utilized her time to dismantle the veneer of bureaucratic normalcy by presenting a chronological sequence of events that appeared both coordinated and highly suspicious. Her line of questioning illuminated a pattern of encrypted communications that occurred behind closed doors during the period when the controversial financial transfers were being finalized. The revelation that certain digital records and physical evidence were allegedly destroyed shortly before the hearing added a layer of criminal intrigue to the proceedings. Such actions suggest a preemptive attempt to sanitize the record and obstruct the constitutional duty of the Senate to provide advice and consent. These evidentiary gaps forced a shift in the narrative from simple policy disagreement to a serious investigation into potential obstruction of justice and administrative malpractice. The Attorney General found herself in an increasingly untenable position as the details of her prior financial amendments were brought to the forefront of the discussion. These amendments, which were filed in the weeks leading up to the public testimony, appeared to be reactive measures intended to retroactively justify unexplained income. Warren pointed out that the timing of these filings coincided perfectly with the emergence of intelligence reports regarding foreign lobbying efforts within the executive branch. This alignment of private financial gain and public policy shifts created a perception of a quid pro quo arrangement that undermines public trust in the Department of Justice. The silence that emanated from the witness stand served as a stark contrast to the rapid-fire delivery of incriminating facts presented by the subcommittee. As the interrogation deepened, the focus shifted toward a specific individual holding dual American and Russian citizenship, who allegedly acted as the primary conduit for the illicit funds. This person had maintained a long-standing professional relationship with the Attorney General, which remained undisclosed until the committee conducted its independent forensic audit of the situation. Bondi struggled to provide a coherent explanation for her public support of certain financial entities that were directly implicated in the laundering of the funds in question. The lack of transparency regarding these associations suggests a profound conflict of interest that may violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Such a breach of protocol is not merely a political failure but a potential criminal liability that demands a thorough prosecutorial review by independent counsel. The silence maintained by the Attorney General throughout much of this confrontation spoke volumes to the observers gathered in the gallery and the millions watching via live broadcast. When faced with direct questions regarding her involvement in the sanctions policy modifications, she chose to offer vague denials rather than substantive refutations of the evidence. This tactical retreat only served to embolden her interrogators, who viewed the lack of defense as a tacit admission of the gravity of the charges. The tension in the room was palpable as the discussion moved toward the specific mechanisms used to bypass federal reporting requirements for foreign currency transactions. Each technical detail revealed by Warren painted a picture of a sophisticated operation intended to subvert the will of the legislature through financial coercion. The implications of this hearing extend far beyond the career of a single cabinet member and touch upon the very foundations of the American democratic process. If an attorney general can be linked to offshore accounts and Baltic money laundering schemes, the entire apparatus of federal law enforcement is called into question. The documentation provided to the committee suggests that the $847,000 was only the tip of a much larger iceberg of clandestine funding. These revelations have prompted calls for an immediate expansion of the investigation to include all personnel who had access to the encrypted communication channels mentioned. The integrity of the nation's borders and its financial systems depends on the ability of its leaders to remain free from the corrupting touch of foreign adversaries. Critics of the administration have seized upon this moment to demand a complete overhaul of the ethics rules governing high-level political appointees and their financial disclosures. The fact that such a complex web of shell companies could be utilized so effectively highlights a glaring weakness in the current regulatory framework. Senator Warren's performance was a masterclass in prosecutorial inquiry, using the Attorney General's own past statements to highlight current inconsistencies. The narrative of a compromised Justice Department is one that resonates deeply with a public already weary of political scandals and perceived systemic corruption. Consequently, the fallout from this specific session is likely to trigger a series of legislative reforms aimed at closing the loopholes used by foreign lobbyists. The destruction of evidence remains perhaps the most damning aspect of the testimony presented thus far during these intense congressional hearings. When a public official is accused of deleting records in anticipation of a subpoena, the legal consequences are typically swift and severe. This element of the scandal introduces the possibility of felony charges related to tampering with a government investigation and the spoliation of evidence. The committee has indicated that they are in possession of metadata that proves the deletions occurred within hours of the initial inquiry being launched. This level of premeditation suggests that those involved were fully aware of the illegal nature of their financial dealings and sought to protect themselves at any cost. Throughout the afternoon, the proceedings took on the character of a legal trial where the defendant was unprepared for the overwhelming weight of the prosecution's discovery. The Attorney General's inability to explain her advocacy for banks involved in her own payment processing was a particularly low point for her defense team. It is rare to see a high-ranking official so thoroughly silenced by the presentation of documented facts and verified financial ledgers. The Baltic connection is especially sensitive given the current geopolitical climate and the ongoing efforts to isolate certain actors through international sanctions. By allegedly facilitating the flow of money from these regions, the Attorney General may have inadvertently aided those seeking to destabilize the global economy. The conclusion of this phase of the hearing marked the beginning of a new and more dangerous chapter for the embattled Attorney General. The committee formally announced its intention to issue a series of binding subpoenas for all personal bank records and private communication logs. This move signals that the legislative branch is no longer willing to rely on voluntary cooperation and will instead use its full constitutional authority to uncover the truth. The threat of criminal prosecution now hangs over the Department of Justice like a dark cloud threatening to disrupt the function of the legal system. As the investigation moves forward, the pressure on Bondi to resign or face a formal impeachment process continues to mount within both parties. The issuance of formal subpoenas by the Senate Judiciary Committee represents a definitive escalation from political theater to a high-stakes legal confrontation with the executive branch. This procedural shift signifies that the legislative body has found the initial explanations provided by Attorney General Pam Bondi to be fundamentally insufficient and potentially deceptive. These legal mandates seek to compel the production of comprehensive datasets including metadata from private servers and detailed ledgers from international financial intermediaries. The focus remains steadfast on the $847,000, which serves as a central pillar in the broader allegation of systemic institutional corruption. Investigators are now looking to bridge the gap between the offshore shell companies and the specific policy decisions that favored foreign interests during critical periods. The legal jeopardy facing the Attorney General is compounded by the fact that the Federal Bureau of Investigation has reportedly opened a parallel inquiry into these matters. While the Senate focuses on oversight and legislative reform, the Department of Justice's own internal watchdogs are now scrutinizing the conduct of their superior officer. This creates a precarious situation where the nation's chief law enforcement officer is being investigated by the very agents she is supposed to lead. The potential for a conflict of interest is so profound that many legal scholars are calling for the immediate appointment of a special prosecutor. Such a move would ensure that the investigation remains insulated from political pressure and that any evidence of money laundering is pursued with absolute impartiality. One of the most concerning aspects of the testimony involves the role of the Baltic banks, which have historically been identified as high-risk zones for illicit financial flows. These institutions often serve as the first entry point for capital originating from sanctioned regions seeking access to the broader Western markets. By allegedly utilizing these conduits, the parties involved displayed a sophisticated understanding of the vulnerabilities within the global anti-money laundering framework. The committee's evidence suggests that the transfers were structured in small increments to avoid triggering the automated reporting systems required by international banking regulations. This technique, known as smurfing, is a hallmark of professional money laundering operations and points toward a high level of criminal intent. As the public becomes more aware of the intricacies of the scandal, the demand for transparency regarding the Attorney General's personal ties to Russia has intensified. The dual citizen identified as the intermediary appears to have had unprecedented access to the Department of Justice's policy planning meetings. This level of proximity to sensitive decision-making processes by an unregistered foreign agent constitutes a significant breach of national security protocols. The investigation is currently examining whether any classified information was shared during the encrypted communications mentioned by Senator Warren during the hearing. If it is proven that state secrets were compromised, the charges could escalate from financial crimes to more serious offenses involving national defense. The silence of Pam Bondi during these critical moments of questioning has been interpreted by many as a calculated legal strategy to avoid self-incrimination. However, in the court of public opinion, this reticence is often viewed as a confirmation of the most damaging theories regarding her conduct. The inability to explain why she advocated for the leniency of certain financial institutions that were simultaneously processing her payments remains a central mystery. This perceived quid pro quo strike at the heart of the American promise of equal justice under the law for every citizen regardless of status. When the person responsible for upholding that law is seen to be benefiting from its subversion, the entire social contract is put at risk. The political ramifications are already being felt across the aisle as members of the Attorney General's own party begin to distance themselves from her. The bipartisan nature of the concern highlights the gravity of the allegations involving foreign influence and the integrity of the electoral process. Legislative leaders are currently drafting new measures to tighten the reporting requirements for any financial interactions between cabinet members and foreign entities. These proposed reforms aim to eliminate the use of shell companies and offshore trusts as a means of hiding income from public view. The Bondi scandal has effectively become the catalyst for a new era of transparency that could reshape how the federal government operates. Forensic accountants working for the committee have spent hundreds of hours tracing the digital footprint of the $847,000 payment. Their findings suggest that the money moved through at least 4 different jurisdictions before reaching its final destination in accounts linked to the Attorney General. This complexity was clearly intended to make any future audit nearly impossible for traditional law enforcement agencies to conduct effectively. It was only through the cooperation of international whistleblowers that the Senate was able to piece together the true nature of these financial transactions. The bravery of these individuals in coming forward has provided the committee with the leverage needed to demand full accountability from the executive branch. The potential for criminal prosecution is no longer a distant theoretical possibility, but a looming reality that could materialize in the coming months. Grand jury proceedings are rumored to be in the early stages as prosecutors weigh the strength of the evidence regarding wire fraud and conspiracy. The destruction of evidence mentioned during the hearing is likely to be a primary focus of any formal indictment that may be issued. If it can be proven that Bondi or her associates intentionally deleted records to thwart the investigation, the legal penalties will be severe. The American legal system does not look kindly upon those who use their positions of power to obstruct the search for the truth. In the midst of this turmoil, the functioning of the Department of Justice has been significantly hampered as staff members grapple with the leadership crisis. Many career prosecutors are concerned that the ongoing scandal is tarnishing the reputation of the institution and undermining their work on other cases. The morale within the department is at an all-time low as rumors of an impending leadership change continue to circulate through the halls of power. This internal instability poses a risk to national security, as the department's ability to respond to emerging threats is diminished by the ongoing controversy. The resolution of this crisis is therefore a matter of urgent national importance that transcends the fate of any single individual. The hearing concluded with a stern warning from the committee chair regarding the consequences of further non-cooperation with the ongoing congressional inquiry. The message was clear that the Senate would use every tool at its disposal to ensure that the facts are brought to light. This includes the possibility of holding the Attorney General in contempt of Congress if the requested documents are not produced within the specified time frame. Such a move would be a historic rebuke and would further isolate Bondi from her remaining allies in the Capitol. The stage is now set for a protracted legal battle that will test the limits of executive privilege and the power of legislative oversight. The architectural complexity of the shell companies used to facilitate the $847,000 transfer reveals a level of professional planning that transcends mere administrative oversight. Investigators have identified a primary entity based in a Caribbean jurisdiction known for its rigid bank secrecy laws, which served as the initial collection point for the Russian capital. From this tropical outpost, the funds were split into dozens of smaller tranches and routed through a series of intermediary firms with generic names like Global Strategic Holdings and North Atlantic Consulting Services. Each layer of this corporate veil was designed to satisfy basic compliance checks, while providing no meaningful information about the true source of the wealth or its ultimate intended purpose. This method of layering is a classic technique used by transnational criminal organizations to integrate illicit gains into the legitimate global financial system. The role of the dual citizen intermediary has become a focal point of intense scrutiny for both congressional investigators and counterintelligence officials within the FBI. This individual, who maintains high-level connections in both Moscow and Washington, reportedly facilitated the introduction between the Attorney General and the Baltic banking executives. Surveillance logs and travel records suggest that these parties met in several European capitals in the months preceding the controversial policy shifts regarding international sanctions. During these clandestine meetings, the logistics of the financial transfers were allegedly finalized alongside discussions about neutralizing specific legal threats to foreign investments in the United States. The failure of the Attorney General to register this individual as a foreign agent represents a significant legal vulnerability that could lead to charges under federal lobbying statutes. European regulatory bodies have also begun to take an active interest in the case as the implications for the stability of the Eurozone financial system become increasingly apparent. The European Central Bank has launched its own internal review of the Baltic institutions involved to determine if they systemically ignored anti-money laundering protocols to accommodate these specific transactions. This international dimension adds a layer of diplomatic complexity to the domestic investigation, as American authorities must now coordinate with foreign counterparts to secure essential bank records. The willingness of these international partners to share sensitive data suggests a growing global consensus that the integrity of the financial system must be protected from high-level political corruption. Such cooperation is rare and indicates that the evidence already in the public domain is considered credible and exceptionally serious by global financial watchdogs. One of the most revealing pieces of evidence uncovered by Senator Warren's team involves a series of digital messages that appear to coordinate the timing of the payments with key legislative deadlines. These communications suggest that the $847,000 was not a single lump sum but rather a performance-based incentive linked to specific administrative actions. For instance, a substantial portion of the funds was reportedly released within 48 hours of the Department of Justice issuing a favorable legal opinion regarding foreign investment transparency. This direct temporal correlation between financial reward and official government action provides a compelling narrative for prosecutors seeking to prove a quid pro quo arrangement. The Attorney General's continued inability to provide an alternative explanation for this timing has left her defense team in a state of perpetual crisis management. The psychological impact of these revelations on the American public cannot be overstated, as it touches upon the deeply held belief in the impartiality of the justice system. When citizens see documented proof of their highest law enforcement official engaging in the same types of offshore financial maneuvers they are tasked with prosecuting, it creates a profound sense of disillusionment. This erosion of trust is particularly damaging at a time when the nation is grappling with broader questions about foreign interference in domestic political processes. The Bondi scandal has effectively become a symbol of a perceived systemic failure, where wealth and foreign influence can bypass the traditional checks and balances of the constitutional order. Consequently, the demand for a decisive and public resolution to this matter has become a rallying cry for activists across the political spectrum. Forensic analysis of the encrypted communication channels used by the participants has revealed a specialized jargon intended to further obscure the nature of their dealings. Terms like logistical support and administrative adjustments were allegedly used as code for the movement of cash and the modification of sensitive government documents. This attempt at linguistic camouflage suggests that the parties involved were fully aware of the potential legal consequences of their actions and sought to create a layer of plausible deniability. However, the sheer volume of these messages and their consistency with the physical movement of money has provided investigators with a robust roadmap of the alleged conspiracy. The recovery of these deleted messages from secure servers represents a major technical achievement for the committee's digital forensic experts and a catastrophic blow to the Attorney General's defense. As the investigation enters its third month, the focus is beginning to shift toward the other senior officials who may have been aware of or participated in the scheme. It is highly unlikely that a financial operation of this magnitude and complexity could have been carried out by a single individual without at least some level of institutional support. Investigators are now reviewing the internal emails and meeting logs of several high-ranking deputies within the Department of Justice to determine the extent of the rot. This expansion of the probe suggests that the committee believes the corruption may be more widespread than initially reported, touching upon multiple divisions within the federal bureaucracy. The possibility of a broader systemic failure has prompted calls for a comprehensive audit of all major policy decisions made by the department during the tenure of the current administration. The response from the White House has been a mix of defiant public support for the Attorney General and quiet internal preparations for her potential departure. Legal advisors to the President are reportedly concerned that the ongoing scandal is consuming valuable political capital and distracting from the broader legislative agenda. There are indications that several potential successors are already being vetted in anticipation of a forced resignation or a formal impeachment proceeding in the House of Representatives. This sense of impending change has created a vacuum of leadership within the Department of Justice as career staff wait to see who will ultimately emerge from the turmoil. The instability at the top of the nation's legal apparatus poses a significant challenge to the effective enforcement of federal law and the protection of the public interest. The international media has also seized upon the story portraying the American justice system as being in the midst of a historic crisis of credibility. Reports in major European and Asian news outlets have highlighted the irony of the United States lecturing other nations on corruption, while its own Attorney General faces credible allegations of money laundering. This negative global perception has real-world consequences for American foreign policy, as it weakens the nation's moral authority on the world stage. Diplomatic efforts to promote transparency and the rule of law in developing nations are being undermined by the daily headlines emanating from the Senate Judiciary Committee. The resolution of the Bondi scandal is therefore not just a domestic necessity but a critical component of restoring America's international standing and its reputation for integrity. The conclusion of this phase of the inquiry has left little doubt that the legal and political pressure on Pam Bondi will only continue to intensify in the coming weeks. With new witnesses coming forward and additional financial records being secured, the narrative of a sophisticated foreign influence operation is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The stage is now set for a final confrontation that will determine not only the fate of the Attorney General but also the future of executive accountability in the United States. As the nation watches this drama unfold, the fundamental question remains whether the existing legal framework is strong enough to hold even the most powerful officials to account for their actions. The answer to that question will define the American political landscape for years to come and serve as a testament to the resilience of its democratic institutions. The investigation took a dramatic and unexpected turn when several whistleblowers from within the financial compliance sector began to provide testimony under condition of anonymity. Nung Sianan Nay, Von la Cac Chuyen Jiafan Tik Rui Rotai Cac Ngan Hankwokti, Da Kung Kap Nung Cai Nin Trutung Ko Vi Kak Thukma Cac Kan Bao Du Vi Jiao Dich Kwa Pam Bondi Da by Lam Ngomot Kak Ko He Thong. They revealed that internal software designed to detect politically exposed persons had repeatedly flagged the $847,000 transfer as a high-risk event requiring immediate manual review. However, according to these insiders, senior management at the implicated Baltic institutions intervened to override these security protocols, citing high-level diplomatic sensitivities as the justification for their actions. This testimony effectively dismantles the defense that the transfers were routine administrative matters and instead suggests a coordinated effort to bypass global anti-money laundering standards. As the legislative inquiry broadened its scope, the role of digital forensics became the primary engine for uncovering the truth behind the encrypted communication logs. KY Thuat Koya Fuk Du Liu Tien Tien Da Fep Cac Chuyen Jia Kwa Uy Ban Tu Fap Truicap Vau Cac Fan Don Bo No Tunung Mechu Juok Chola Da by Zoasak Truak Fien Da Utran. Nung man vo du liu ne diatet lo cac quoc hoitho I truck tape juavan fong Attorney General va cac di dien qua tapdon nang long nga dang tim kak any tran cac len trung fat kinti. The messages contain specific instructions on how to draft policy language that would create legal loopholes for certain foreign investments while maintaining the appearance of strict regulatory compliance. These digital fingerprints provide the smoking gun evidence that Senator Warren had hinted at during the opening phases of the interrogation process and make the prospect of a criminal indictment increasingly likely. Su tai doi kong ki tai doi capital tro nen ro ret ki cac gi sai thuak dang kong hoa. Nung goi ban do ju tai do to that, but do kong kai bei to su fan no truak nung bang chung hua. Many conservative lawmakers who had previously defended Bondi based on her record of public service found the documented links to offshore shell companies and Russian interests to be indefensible. This shift in partisan alignment is a critical development because it signals that the Attorney General no longer possesses the political cover necessary to survive a formal impeachment vote. The consensus moving through the halls of Congress is that the integrity of the Department of Justice must be preserved, even if it requires the removal of its highest-ranking official. This bipartisan pressure has created a sense of inevitability regarding the conclusion of the investigation and the subsequent legal consequences for those involved. The impact of the scandal has also reached the inner circles of the American intelligence community, with officials expressing concern over the compromise of counterintelligence operations. It has been suggested that the dual citizen intermediary at the center of the financial web may have used their access to Bondi to identify and neutralize undercover agents working in the region. If proven true, this would elevate the case from a financial corruption scandal to a major national security catastrophe involving potential acts of espionage and treason. The Senate Intelligence Committee has now requested access to all transcripts from the Judiciary Committee to begin their own classified assessment of the damage done to American interests abroad. This overlapping of investigations ensures that every facet of the Attorney General's conduct will be scrutinized by the most powerful oversight bodies in the federal government. Trongboy kan kang thanglio thang, CAC Chuyen Giafap Lai Tai CAC Dai Ho Kang Do Kwamai Da But Do Fan Tik CAC Kich Ban V MOT Vu Trui To Hinsu Doivoy MOT Bo Trung Tu Fap Duong Name. The unique nature of this case presents several constitutional challenges regarding the limits of executive immunity and the process for bringing a sitting cabinet member to trial in federal court. Most scholars agree that while a president may have certain protections, the head of the Department of Justice is subject to the same legal standards as any other citizen when accused of private financial crimes. The possibility of charges related to the Foreign Agents Registration Act and the Bank Secrecy Act is being discussed openly in legal journals and news broadcasts across the nation. The precedent set by this case will likely define the boundaries of political accountability for decades to come as the nation seeks to prevent a recurrence of such high-level malfeasance. The public reaction to the recovered encrypted messages has been one of intense scrutiny and demand for immediate action from the executive branch. Social media platforms have been flooded with discussions about the ethics of administrative adjustments and the perceived hypocrisy of those in power. Protests have begun to materialize outside the Department of Justice building, with citizens calling for a return to transparency and the rule of law. The pressure on the White House to demand Bondi's resignation has reached a breaking point as the scandal threatens to overshadow all other domestic policy priorities. Even loyal supporters of the administration are finding it difficult to reconcile the documented evidence of foreign payments with the official narrative of innocence and public service. Forensic accountants have now extended their search to include the financial records of several immediate family members of the Attorney General to see if the illicit funds were dispersed further. There are indications that secondary accounts in Western Europe may have been used to purchase high-value assets on behalf of these relatives shortly after the Baltic transfers were completed. This pattern of secondary laundering is common in sophisticated corruption schemes where the primary actor attempts to distance themselves from the initial source of the bribe. If these assets can be linked back to the $847,000 payment, it would provide prosecutors with additional leverage and potential new charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering. The web of financial intrigue continues to grow more complex as each new layer of the corporate structure is peeled away by investigators. As the hearing progressed toward its final stages, the Attorney General's legal team attempted to shift the blame toward lower-level staffers, claiming they had acted without her direct knowledge. This defense strategy has been met with significant skepticism from the committee members who pointed to the encrypted messages sent directly from Bondi's personal devices. The idea that a cabinet member would be unaware of nearly $1 million moving through accounts they personally controlled is being dismissed as an insult to the intelligence of the American people. This failed attempt to deflect responsibility has only served to further isolate the Attorney General and strengthen the resolve of her interrogators to seek a full and public accounting. The lack of a credible defense has left Bondi in a state of professional and legal paralysis, as the walls of the investigation close in around her. The international community is watching the proceedings with a mixture of concern and fascination as the world's most powerful democracy grapples with this internal crisis. Several allied nations have expressed worry that the instability within the Department of Justice could affect international cooperation on terrorism and transnational crime. The Bondi scandal has effectively slowed the gears of international law enforcement as foreign partners hesitate to share sensitive information with a department whose leader is under such intense suspicion. This diplomatic fallout emphasizes that the consequences of political corruption are never contained within national borders, but have a ripple effect that touches every corner of the globe. The restoration of American credibility will require transparent and rigorous application of the law to ensure that justice is seen to be done. The conclusion of this part of the testimony has set the stage for a final showdown between the legislative branch and the embattled Attorney General. The subpoenas have been issued, the witnesses have been called, and the digital evidence has been laid bare for the world to see. The next phase of the process will likely involve formal articles of impeachment and a trial in the Senate to determine if Bondi should be removed from office. Regardless of the final outcome, the investigation has already fundamentally altered the political landscape and forced a long overdue conversation about the influence of foreign money in American government. The resilience of the constitutional system is being tested in real time as the nation waits for the final verdict on a scandal that has shaken the foundations of the Justice Department. The culmination of the Senate Judiciary Committee's investigation has led to a watershed moment in American legal history, as the formal articles of impeachment against Attorney General Pam Bondi are prepared for a floor vote. This move marks the first time in over a century that a cabinet official of such high standing has faced removal for allegedly facilitating foreign financial interference within the Department of Justice. Legal experts anticipate that the charges will center on a criminal conspiracy to commit money laundering and willful violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act linked to the $847,000 Russian payment. The evidence suggests that the Attorney General did not merely act out of negligence, but was an active participant in a sophisticated scheme to trade official policy shifts for private financial gain. If convicted by the Senate, the legal immunity typically enjoyed by high-ranking officials will vanish, clearing the path for federal prosecutors to pursue a series of criminal indictments in open court. The potential sentences for the offenses described are among the most severe for white-collar and national security crimes, with some analysts predicting a combined prison term of up to 20 years. Under federal sentencing guidelines, the use of a high-level public office to facilitate a criminal enterprise serves as a major aggravating factor that significantly increases mandatory minimum penalties. Furthermore, the destruction of evidence and the use of encrypted communication to obstruct a congressional inquiry could add additional years for tampering with a government investigation. The forfeiture of all illicitly obtained assets, including the funds routed through Baltic banks and any secondary property purchases, is considered a certainty as part of the judicial restitution process. This aggressive prosecutorial stance is intended to send a clear message that the American legal system will not tolerate the monetization of public trust by its most powerful guardians. History will likely record the Bondi scandal as a definitive case study in the dangers of modern foreign influence and the vulnerabilities of digital governance. The ease with which offshore shell companies and Baltic financial institutions were used to bypass federal oversight highlights a glaring need for a systemic overhaul of global anti-money laundering regulations. Scholars argue that the Bondi precedent will force future administrations to implement more rigorous vetting processes and real-time financial monitoring for all political appointees. The incident has also sparked a national conversation about the ethics of encrypted communications among public officials, with many calling for a total ban on the use of non-government servers for official business. By exposing these loopholes, the investigation has paradoxically strengthened the very democratic institutions that the conspiracy sought to undermine. The impact on the Department of Justice itself will be felt for generations as the agency begins the long process of internal cleansing and structural reform. A special task force has already been proposed to review every major decision made during Bondi's tenure to ensure that no other policies were bought and paid for by foreign actors. This integrity audit is seen as a necessary step to restore the morale of career prosecutors and agents who felt betrayed by their leadership's alleged double-dealing. Many within the legal community are calling for the creation of an independent oversight body with the power to investigate the Attorney General without interference from the executive branch. Such a reform would ensure that future allegations of high-level corruption are handled with the transparency and speed that the public deserves. As the nation moves toward a resolution, the bipartisan consensus that emerged in the final stages of the hearing remains a rare glimmer of hope in a divided political landscape. The fact that members of both parties were willing to follow the evidence to its logical conclusion demonstrates the enduring strength of the constitutional system of checks and balances. Citizens across the country have expressed a renewed sense of civic engagement, realizing that public oversight is the only effective defense against the encroachment of illicit wealth into government. The Bondi scandal has served as a harsh reminder that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and that the rule of law must apply equally to the highest and the lowest in the land. The closing of this dark chapter will ultimately be defined by the resilience of the American people and their refusal to accept a justice system that can be compromised by the highest bidder.